There we go. So I am honored to be able to introduce Norm to all of you, those of you who don't already know him, for this talk today. I first met Norm while I was on the board, and he probably met me before that, but I first met him in my recollection when I was on the board for the temple in Danielson, and that's how I always refer to it at our house. But it's Temple Beth Israel and Preservation Society, and it's got a remarkable story that Norm is very well versed at sharing, and so that's what I wanted to do. I also wanted to let you know that Norm not only knows my mom, but he knew my dad. So that's really special too, that he has that connection, that he knows my dad, who passed away when I was only 23. So that was just really special. When I first asked him, I'm like, so you knew my dad? So that was just really, really neat. So I wanted to also introduce him formally with his bio, so that those of you who haven't met Norman before now know more about him and why he's joining us for this BYOB. I don't see any bagels yet. I haven't had mine yet, so sorry about that. But oh, you've got a bagel or toast. Okay. Wonderful, Michael. So at least we're holding true to our story. All right. So without further ado, let me get started. Norman Berman is President Emeritus of the Temple Beth Israel Preservation Society in Danielson, Connecticut, northeastern Connecticut, Quiet Corner. He helped to form that organization in 2009 and served as its president from 2014 through 2019. It's a very, very important building, and Norm will talk more about that. Norman was born in a displaced persons camp in Germany after World War II. His parents, both Holocaust survivors, met and married in the camp. Upon arriving to the US in 1949, Norman's family settled on a poultry farm in nearby Moosup, Connecticut, and were among the early members of Temple Beth Israel in Danielson. Graduating from Boston University and Suffolk University Law School, Norman was a founding partner in Berman. Is it tobacco?
It is.
Okay.
With an A, yes.
Okay, thank you. A Boston law firm specializing in securities fraud class actions. He's been practicing law for 45 years. He recently moved to Brooklyn, Connecticut, after spending most of his adult life in Newton, Massachusetts. He has one daughter who sits on the board of the Preservation Society. Norman grew up speaking Yiddish at home. He has served on the board of directors of the Boston Workers' Circle and has sung with its Yiddish chorus for the past 24 years. In recent years, Norman has spoken at local middle and high schools about the lessons of the Holocaust. Without further ado, it's all yours, Norm, and we'll have time. We're gonna have about an hour, Norm, and at the end of your talk, or as you see fit, we'll take questions from people that are here. And if you have a question, I ask that if you can, raise your digital hand, which is at the bottom of your screen, to raise hand, and I will do my darndest to call on you, or Norm will, and then you'll of course have to unmute and then mute back again afterwards. So thank you. I think that's it for the housekeeping. It's all yours, Norm.
Thank you. And good morning to everyone. It's nice to see you folks, and thank you for inviting me to spend some time with you to talk about something that's very close to my heart. Good morning also to some familiar faces who know this story and actually are part of the story, helped to create it. I will share some thoughts. I'd like to show you some photographs. And as Judy said, I'd be delighted to engage in conversation, have any questions or comments, I would welcome them. So as Judy mentioned, I grew up in Moosup. I attended NFA, left for Boston College, law school, became a lawyer, and returned a few years ago after a 55-year hiatus, returned to Brooklyn, to the Quiet Corner, which is 10 miles from where I where I started. And I've done some interesting things. In many ways, you could say that I've had a typical American experience as a youngster and then also as an adult. But there are two things that I think distinguish me from many of my contemporaries. First, I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. And the second is that I grew up in the Danielson Jewish community. And I'll tell you a little about that community because I think it's a story worth repeating. Temple Beth Israel in Danielson, and the organization that I'm proud to be a part of, the Temple Beth Israel Preservation Society, of which I currently chair its ritual and education committees. The temple itself was incorporated in 1951. It was 58 years later that the Preservation Society was formed in 2009. And it was formed because Joel Rosenberg, a child of founders, Paula's brother, he called a group of children together who had grown up in and around Danielson and whose parents had been members of the temple. And he called us, I mean, this wasn't a group that had been in touch very much. We had all headed off in our respective separate directions. But he called us. And he had become aware and concerned that our temple building would be possibly sold, repurposed. And he said, we need to do something to save the building. And, you know, the initial response was, why? You know, for so many of us, this was not, it was not something that was any longer part of our lives and really had faded into, certainly speaking for myself, you know, history, not something that I was immediately concerned with. And many of us had left town. We had joined other synagogues. By the early 2000s, the community itself had become quite small and had entered into a partnership with another temple in Putnam, Connecticut. But something about Joel's call, and he was quite persuasive, something stuck. And we realized that we risked losing not only the building, which, again, as I mentioned, we had, many of us, very little connection. But with that loss, we risked losing something else, and that would be the unique story. An important chapter, I think, in the history of Jews in Connecticut, and our parents' story, that of their community, and really our own story as children of that community. You know, he persuaded us, and we set up a corporation, a nonprofit. We negotiated for and secured the deed to the property from the other shul, and we committed to preserving the building, and in doing so, honoring our parents, their stories, and teaching the lessons of the Holocaust, something that for us children of survivors, we were beginning to understand. I mean, we knew it all along, but we were beginning to understand it in more and more depth. And indeed, one of the benefits of that endeavor was that we learned something valuable about ourselves. So we'll turn a bit to some history. Prior to World War II, there was in Danielson a small Jewish community, barely a minyan, small group of Jewish professionals, merchants, perhaps 10 families. And they formed what they called the Jewish Community Club, Judy Engel's grandfather, I believe, was one of the original residents in the area and one of the founders, and was to become a pillar of the Danielson temple community. These were essentially American Jews, but they were quite observant. They had a Torah. They ordered kosher meat from Norwich, which was put on a bus, and the bus came to Danielson. They would meet the bus in Danielson to get their kosher meat. They held rituals at their homes, Shabbos, holidays. For larger gatherings, they rented halls. And then World War II happened. The systematic murder of 6 million Jews happened. The war ended, and with the defeat of the Nazis, the end of the war, the death camps were liberated. Survivors, the remaining fragment, the Sharit HaPleita, were gathered in displaced persons camps. They had lost everything. They were sick, weak, traumatized, and they found themselves in a liminal space between two worlds. Their old world, the old world was gone, destroyed. What was left of it was dangerous. They couldn't go back. And they didn't know yet what their new world would be like. Zalman Grinberg, the first chair of the Central Committee of Liberated Jews for the U.S. zone of occupation in Germany, gave a speech in October 45, and this was in Munich, and he said, the remnant of Jewry is gathered here. This is its waiting room. It's a shabby room. So we hope the day will come when the Jews will be taken to a place they can call their own. So I'm going to tell you a little about my family. My remarks aren't meant to apply to every survivor family. I've certainly spoken to enough of them to know that our experience wasn't terribly different from theirs, but I'll speak about what I really know, which is my experience and that of my folks. My parents, of blessed memory, Misha and Bluma, my aunt, my grandmother, were among the survivors. Each of my parents lost most of their families in the Holocaust. My mother's little sister was murdered. We lost cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents. My father's parents, 2 brothers, murdered, cousins, aunts, uncles. They lost their homes. They lost their possessions. They had nothing. And Misha and Bluma met in Camp Fehrenwald, DP Camp Fehrenwald, which was some 18 to 20 miles south of Munich. And they courted. They were married there. And I was born there as part of the baby boom in the camps. This was, there were a lot of women of childbearing age, and there were images of children lined up in little strollers in the camp. We were there until late 1949. Imagine, it's always amazing to me whenever I think about it, to have a child after the trauma of the Holocaust. To my parents, I was a miracle. That child represented the future, a reason to keep on living. I often say that all that was missing from my birth was some straw, a manger, 3 wise men, and some sheep. That so significant was my birth. And after 4 years of my parents being there, late 49, it came our turn to leave. And we got our shots. In those days, everyone got vaccinated. And traveled to Bremerhaven. We boarded the SS General Holbrook, a converted troop carrier, and crossed the Atlantic, landed in Boston, took a train, ended up in New York. We were sponsored by cousins who had been in the United States prior to the war. And we settled in a tenement in the Bronx. We spoke only Yiddish. My parents worked during the day. They went to school at night. They learned English, sort of. And they still spoke with very heavy Yiddish accents. And we spoke Yiddish at home. Bluma worked in a sweatshop, Misha in a luggage factory. And my grandmother, Fega, Bluma's mother, stayed at home with me. And I spent my days standing at the window of the tenement looking out and watching the world go by in the Bronx. A note at this point about the Jewish Agricultural Society, which played a big role in the creation of the Danielson congregation. Jewish Agricultural Society, founded and funded by Baron Maurice de Hirsch. He lived 1831 to 1896, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. Built the Orient Express. He was called the Moses of the New World, and in the late 1800s, he met with the head of HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and together they established a fund, the Baron de Hirsch Fund, and de Hirsch wrote a check for $2.4 million at that time. Even today, it's still a lot of money, but then it was really a lot of money, or in today's dollars, it's a lot of money. And the purpose was to educate immigrants from Eastern Europe, Eastern European countries. The fund founded the Jewish Agricultural Society. That happened in 1900, with the objective of encouraging agriculture among Jews in America. And de Hirsch wrote, this is a quote, "The object of my life is to give a portion of my companions in faith the possibility of finding a new existence primarily as farmers." So after the end of World War II, so that was the Jewish Agricultural Society. But after the end of the war, there was a fellow, Benjamin Miller, who was working as an agent. He was employed by the Agricultural Society, and his job was to find and recruit refugees looking to start a new chapter of their lives, fresh air, green grass, freedom from factories and tenements, as farmers. And his area, his territory was Connecticut, parts of New Jersey, New York, but his focus was on Connecticut. And so what he did was he went into the Jewish neighborhoods. He enlisted families to leave the city, come to the country. And he convinced one family to come and move to the Danielson, Killingly area. And they settled, and they got on their feet. They were actually making a living as farmers. And what he then did was he went back into the tenements, and he'd say, "Look, come take a ride with me. I want you to meet someone." And he would drive them out to Connecticut. He would make the introduction, and they would speak in Yiddish, and they would compare notes where, what was your shtetl? Where did you come from? What camps were you in? And can you make a living here? And they said, yeah. And they said, this is what we do, And so the second family settled. And then the same pattern was followed again and again, until by 1953, 54, this started in 49. There had been close to 40 families that settled in the general area of Killingly, on farms, Yiddish-speaking refugees, immigrants, on poultry farms, mostly poultry farms. There were some dairy farms. And so my parents were among that group of recruits. We bought a farm in Moosup in '52 with some savings. We passed the hat among our New York relatives for a down payment. We got a mortgage that Ben Miller helped us secure from a local bank, Connecticut Bank and Trust, and we had a farm, bought a farm, and the experience initially, my mother was one of these women that she was a great storyteller. She shared everything. It all came from the heart. And she had a great memory, and she had this wonderful lilt in her voice when she told her stories, always in Yiddish. And she described that first afternoon, late afternoon, they were on the farm. And she said it was late fall, it was cold, it was raw, there was a mist in the air. And she walked out onto one of the fields alone and looked around, and she wept. And she was scared. She said, I felt we made a terrible mistake. We've made a terrible mistake. We know nothing about farming. We don't have a mastery of the language. Sure, they had gone to night school. They knew a few words. We have no money. We're alone. We know one or two families. But how will we ever survive? She said. And of course, coming from a survivor, we know the answer. So they worked the farm. Bluma full-time. My dad worked. He got a job in a local factory, Royal Metal. He would work his shift. He would come home, and then he would work the farm together. They became citizens. Proud moment for them. They planted a garden. They made the farm beautiful. Her name is Bluma. She loved flowers. I mean, this made perfect sense. But assimilation was, this wasn't a natural thing. They were teenagers when they were caught up in the war. Both of them had about a fourth grade education. We were the only Jewish family in Moosup. I went to school my first day, public school, and I don't know. I expected the kids to speak Yiddish because that's all we spoke. I didn't know English. And I came home. No one did, and I was very upset. But I learned quickly. I still feel like it's my second language because Yiddish. I'll dream in Yiddish. I've recently turned back to studying Yiddish, and there's something that just feels so, in my heart about it. But as a child, my job became to interpret America to Misha and Bluma. Where to go, what to say, what to wear, how to be. At an early age, I think I was 5 or 6, I would be handed the phone, and Bluma would whisper in my ear the things I was supposed to say to the guy at the other end. And it would be things like, my mother says that she won't pay more than 80 cents for, and I don't remember what it was. But we were negotiating prices for something, grain, eggs, who knows what, supplies. And that was part of my job. I wanted to be like the other kids. I'd run off, get in trouble, whatever, but I couldn't do it. I had a job. I had responsibilities. And among those responsibilities was to please them, protect them, comfort them. I was also the fixer. When I was in college, a piece of equipment would break or something, I'd get a call. I had to jump in the car, drive to the farm, and fix it. My friends didn't know what to make of me, but that was my job. And I often scolded my parents. I would say, look, why do you choose to do things the hard way? Here are modern ways. Here are things that you could do to make your lives easier. But it was always, no, this is a simple way. This is the way we did it back home. And this is what we'll do. So turn the page. Let's talk about Temple Beth Israel. With the influx of refugees, this little rural community in Danielson, the Jewish community, realized it was time to build a temple. And starting in 51, they raised money, they made plans, they broke ground, and they built the lower level and immediately occupied it and started to use it for various gatherings, services, and the like. And what was amazing was we reached, I mean, they had no money. And they reached out into the community and local businesses and you know, the internal conversation was they'll never give us any money. I mean, what do they know from Jews? We're outsiders, we're newcomers, why should they support the building of a temple in this town where there had never been a rooted, substantial Jewish presence? But they did. We received donations from businesses. We received support and donations from churches, from civic organizations. What was remarkable was the Christian community welcomed these strangers from a different world, embraced them, supported them, gave them money, encouraged them to build a building. There was one Christian farmer who auctioned a calf. He didn't have the cash, but he said, look, I'll auction a calf. He gave the proceeds to the temple. Some of the Jewish temple members, they'd be on the street. Folks would stop them. They'd give them cash. They'd say, here, this is for the temple. The architect was the son of one of the farmers, became famous for designing theaters around the country. He donated his time, his skill. There were donations of local Brooklyn stone. A lot of labor was volunteered. And so construction began in the early 50s, and that's how it started. They completed the first floor, ran out of money, so they paused. In the meantime, began to use the building as a temple. And there's a powerful image that still sits with me to this day. And it's the first time I remember being in the temple. It was probably around 53 or so, maybe 54. I was 4 or 5 years old. And we came to a function. I'm not sure if it was a holiday probably because there were a lot of people. It was some kind of celebration. And there were other Holocaust survivors there from Poland, Hungary, Vilna, Krakow, Kiev, places whose names we're hearing more and more in today's news. But even then, I associated these places, these names, with Indaheim, back home. There were kids. It was noisy. And it was all Yiddish. And there was just all this energy. And I saw something that I'll always remember. My parents were engaged. They were actually interacting. They were animated. And I saw them laugh for the first time. I saw them laugh. I hadn't seen them. I didn't know that this was part of their repertoire of emotion. I certainly hadn't seen it at home. And it was just a remarkable scene. And so it was in this building, and, for I think other families, they experienced the same thing. This unfinished concrete building in Danielson that saw my parents and the other survivors come to life. They mourned their families, they compared notes, experiences, they recalled their destroyed villages, the loss of their youth, their innocence. They prayed with the ancient melodies. And that they had learned in Cheder back in Europe. And they prayed loud and from the heart, often out of tune. But it didn't matter. And they cried together and they reassured one another. And they took on, and I think quite successfully, the challenge of healing and turning a page, starting new chapters for their lives. They raised their children. They built homes, they improved their farms, they expanded them, and they dared to hope and dream about the future, just like normal people. We had a Hebrew school, we had a sisterhood, Shabbos, holiday services, USY, holiday parties. The place came to life. Be assured, not all was idyllic. This was a diverse community. They came from every corner of the Jewish world. So that same resilience and determination that perhaps helped them to survive was reflected in their personalities. Stubbornness, conviction, strength, and we ranged from the very orthodox to the atheist. Agnostics, different temperaments, aggressive, boisterous, quiet, reserved, Republicans, Democrats, mostly Democrats, but socialists. And there were plenty of disagreements. And to make matters worse, they tried to find a middle ground, so they affiliated with the United Synagogue. They figured conservative, safe, and this ensured that nobody was happy. It was either too observant or not observant enough, too hot, too cold. It didn't matter. But they were alive, and they shared a common traumatic experience, and they knew that they had each other. This building was so much more than a synagogue. It was a community center. It was a sanatorium. It was a country club for farmers. For so many broken hearts, it became life support. For many, it was their sole source of interaction, socialization, socializing, and their rehabilitation. And the color came back into their skin, their breathing stabilized, and their lives took on new purpose and meaning. It was Freilach. It was Freilach. And they sang and they prayed and they raised money for Israel. I mean, the Israel Bond gathering was always one of the big events of the year. And so by the early to mid 60s, there were over 75 families who were members. There were 35 kids in USY. In some ways, it felt like a time warp. I would bring my friends from college to visit. Sometimes they'd come to the farm. This was always an exotic experience for them. And we would go to an event at the temple, and you walked in on a Shabbos, a holiday service, and it felt like you had just walked into a shul in Eastern Europe. It was just with the Yiddish and the accents and the traditional sounds. I mean, this was not an American experience. You were back in the shtetl here. But the big piece of this whole thing is what a warm welcome this community got from the non-Jewish community. Early in its history, there started a tradition of sharing interfaith Thanksgiving services and splitting them with the United Church of Christ in Brooklyn. One year we would have it at the church, another year we would have it at the temple, and we've been doing this for over 60 years. We still do it every year, and this is one of the big events for the community. And we go to their events, they come to ours, and we're active on the Interfaith Council. The building of this temple with widespread non-Jewish community support is the heart of what this building now represents. And it's at the heart of what we gathered together to preserve. We're in a residential neighborhood. It's quiet, it's dignified, and I've always felt it stands as a monument in wood, stone, glass, of a monument to acceptance and friendship and neighborliness. Really the best of who we are as Americans. Maybe who we were, I don't know. But for these immigrants who had witnessed the absolute worst of human nature here in this place, they experienced some of the best. And I think it's a story that it's an important antidote to the ugliness and meanness and pettiness that pollutes and poisons our atmosphere these days. It's a story about immigrants, about people who are different. It's about giving people a chance, about humanity, about generosity, about starting over. It's about love. It's an important chapter of the American story, and that we at the Preservation Society, we intend to tell and retell and teach and preserve because it's just such a good American story, and I think it's illustrative for many reasons. And finally, for us kids, the Kinder, who were fortunate, we didn't think we were fortunate, by the way, when we were growing up. But in retrospect now, with a few years that have gone by, we were fortunate to grow up in that environment. We thought we were embarrassed. I mean, we thought we were disadvantaged. We were embarrassed. Our parents didn't fit in. They spoke with accents. They were awkward, timid. But we learned lessons that stayed with us for the rest of our lives. And only now, in hindsight and in the process of preserving the building, we've come to realize how valuable those lessons were. What a unique experience this was. What a unique gift we had been given. How miraculous our youth was, how important we were, how great our responsibilities. And of course, being a child of survivors is fraught with challenge. So at the time it was difficult, and really even today it's difficult. It's not normal. For many of us, we didn't have a normal childhood. Our parents were damaged. They were different from other kids' parents. And we had to take care of them. We had to protect them. And so with the Preservation Society, we're proud of what we've accomplished. We saved a building, and rather than allow it to be repurposed or sold, we repurposed the community. We repurposed our story. We redesigned and revitalized our rituals. We renewed our relationship with the faith community. We've created a community Seder that fills our space to capacity. Not for the last couple of years, but certainly up pre-pandemic. And it's attended by mostly non-Jews. We established the next generation of storytellers to nurture our story. Our focus is less on prayer, although we do pray, but it's focused on the lessons that we learn from our history and tradition about how to interact in the world. Many of our children have been sufficiently moved to join in our efforts. Many sit on our board, and they even bring their children to our meetings, among them Judy's granddaughter, who joins us from time to time. And I'll just mention one of our proudest achievements is we've created a community archive for us, for our children, grandchildren, and anyone who wants to learn about our community. In that archive, we're capturing the names, the relationships, the stories, photographs, the truth of who these people were. And they were remarkable people. The challenge has always been, how do you build a Jewish community where there are so few Jews? And I think one way to do it is to have a powerful story that transcends the distinctions between conservative and orthodox and Reconstruction and atheist and observant, because finally what we're taught in our tradition is the fundamentals of life with people, not the fundamentals of life with Jews. And that's been one of the driving forces, I think, of our success. So I have some photographs that I would love to share with you, and let me see if I can make that happen. The photographs track my remarks. So they start at the beginning. The My family is well represented there because I happen to have those photographs, but I think they're illustrative of many others' experiences. And then you'll see a lot of those of you who are part of our community, you'll see some familiar faces, a lot of photographs from the temple. So here goes. Let's see.
Thank you so much, Norm. These are just been a wonderful talk this morning. Really, really, I know you're not done, but I
I'm
thought
not done, but
I know, I know, but I just wanted to, get my word in while you're looking for those photos. That, I'm so grateful that Joel called you and called the others who served to save this temple. I know that our daughter Robin was instrumental in getting it on the National Register, and then we were fortunate enough to have her wedding there. So that was really, really special with the Bethel Chuppah. So it was absolutely beautiful. So just 2.5 years ago. So anyway, thank you so much. Do you have those photos?
I do, and
Okay, go
I've
ahead.
got the share button ready. So this is about it's a compilation that I've put together. It's just under 5 minutes.
Okay,
So, and it moves, I think, fairly quickly. So here goes. Here goes.
here we go. It's coming.
And slides and play. Can you see?
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's your parents
Yes, it's their wedding.
at the camp.
It's me.
Snowball fight. That's a lot of chickens, Norm.
It's a start. I'm the short one. This is my bar mitzvah.
That's my grandfather. Right, Mom? Yeah, she's shaking her head. Hey, Mom. There you are. And Rose's dad's on the right. Thank you so much, Norm. That was wonderful. It was great. Of course, for my family, my sister's here from Israel. My mom's Zooming from Amherst, and it was a real treat. Of course, I'll be selfish to see so many familiar faces. I know I saw Rose's dad, my grandfather, my uncle Morty. I saw, so very special. Thank you so much for sharing all those pictures. Please.
It's a pleasure, and it's like when you have people over and you show them slides from your trip. I hope they were not too boring, and I appreciate folks taking time to look and to listen to our story. I would just like to close with something that has always spoken very powerfully to me, and this is a scene from Tony Kushner's Angels in America, the film, where in the movie, Meryl Streep, playing the role of an old New York rabbi, is delivering a eulogy. And these are some of it's a summary of some of her words that I think speak to a lot of what we feel as children of survivors, but also of around just growing up in the environment, in the setting in which we grew up. The inhabitants of this community were of a certain kind of person, kind who survived unfathomable losses. They crossed an ocean and came to America from the villages of Russia and Poland, struggled, worked, fought for their families. Fervently they believed in the Jewish homeland, in the Jewish home. We, descendants of these hardworking and God-fearing men and women, we did not grow up in America. We live in their world. Our clay is the clay of some Litvak shtetl, and our air, the air of the shtetl. Because these immigrants, they carried that whole world on their backs across the ocean in a boat. And they brought it with them. And they put it down in the tenement in the Bronx, and then in Connecticut on a peaceful farm by a brook, surrounded by quiet fields, just like in Daheim, back home, where he davened and she read, and they sang old folk songs. Journeys like theirs no longer exist, but every day of our lives, we, their children, the miles, that voyage from that place to this one, we, their children, cross every day in us, in their children and grandchildren, that journey is. Temple Beth Israel marked, for so many, the end of a difficult journey and the opening chapter of a new one. And looking back, in many ways, our parents came of age there, as did we. And we watched our parents and we fought with them and we learned from them and we saw their resourcefulness, their strength, their resilience. We listened to their Yiddish and we lived their dreams. And we even gave them nachas sometimes. And we remember them and that experience and we embrace it and treasure it and we carry it as we carry out the mission of the Preservation Society. We continue that journey begun by our parents. We will see that their stories and their experiences, as well as ours, will not be forgotten. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Norm, for sharing the story and the photographs, putting it all together. I was wondering, I mean, we'll certainly open it up to if anyone else has questions, but I was wondering, how long were your parents in the displaced persons camp?
So they got there right after liberation. So that would be in 45. They actually spent their first high holidays at the camp. So that was in 45. And then they left in October of 49. So in excess of 4 years, 4.5 years.
It seems like a very long time to be at a camp. And
some others were there even longer. The camp stayed open until 1957. It was one of the last camps to close.
And then to get married and she had a beautiful gown and to have a baby in a camp.
They shared. They had 3 dresses
Yep.
in the camp, and they would pass it from one to the other. They repurposed them.
Right, of course. Why not? So somebody knew how to sew and made those dresses, and that was probably very, very important. So, but to have a baby and in a camp, that's just amazing. I mean, I would never have chosen a home birth, never mind a camp. So anyway, do we have other questions or comments that people would like and want to open it up to other people? Vita, do you have your hand up? You have to unmute.
I do. I did.
Okay.
I just want to comment that this is the first time I ever saw the slow motion of building, of the process of building the building. I've seen the land and I've seen partial and then the finished product, but I never saw this part of it, of just the first floor finished and being used. Norman, could you recognize or name the kids in some of those photographs? I'm just curious.
I think so, but it was, I mean, in many, it was the back of their heads.
No. The one on the stage.
On the stage? Yes. In fact, Joel and I once went through. I mean, Joel is in there. I think. I mean, right now the list is
have
buried.
To label them and put them in the archive.
I could do that. Yes, with help.
With labels.
I'm sure Elsie could help me.
Joel's younger than me, so I don't know, my brother and I might be in there too, but I didn't recognize ourselves. But I'm just curious what era that was, what your age group or, everybody all together. I don't know. Anyway,
well, one of them was my contemporaries because I'm in one of those photographs. And then there's another that's about 10 years later because my brother Jack was in there as well.
My sister was in one of the pictures as well. So I think that was probably the same group you're talking about, Norm.
Yeah.
You have to label these pictures that you know the names of and label them for the archive.
They went by too fast.
That was
I'm looking at faces. I think I saw the Cantor girls in there at one of the pictures.
Yes, I think that's right. Yes.
I just thought it was amazing watching the building being built. That was amazing.
Yeah. I see Nancy has
I'm going to throw this to Judy. Do you think you could arrange a little trip for some Bethel members?
Oh, of course.
Go
I'm
up to
sure
Dan- I
Norm
mean,
would
not
be
that we
happy.
can't do it on our own, but I think it would be great to go as a little group.
Yeah, and then you know, we got to think about food though too, Nancy. So we'll have to figure out where we're going to stop for lunch on the way back.
It's always about food, Judy. I grew up in Moodus, which probably has, unfortunately, I know almost nothing about the beginnings, but I probably had a very similar background, I would say, with farmers in Moodus and our little, our little synagogue. Thank you.
Moodus was a big destination for us in Danielson because we used to get together at Grand Lake Lodge for the.
No, that's actually not Moodus. Grand Lake Lodge is Lebanon. That's Lebanon. Everything
right?
else was everything.
I always thought it was Moodus.
No,
Grand Lake Lodge.
Moodus was another place. Ted Hilton's or something.
Ted Hilton's was the more Christian one. Banner Lodge, where I worked,
Banner
and
Lodge.
actually met my late husband, was
Banner Lodge.
biggie. Yeah, but there was a Grand View, which was owned by Jewish families. There were tons of bungalow colonies and all that in Moodus, and people often would say, "Oh, you're from Moodus?" They would just interpret it as Musaf and say, "You must know Walt Dropo," which is like, no, I had no idea who that was. But Musaf, similar.
I had George Dropo, which was Walt's brother, for phys ed in 6th grade. That's as close as I got to a famous baseball player.
Yeah. But
he was my homeroom teacher. I was
right.
Oh, that's funny.
No wonder.
This is near Colchester, and then Colchester was near Lebanon, but that was kind of the sort of Jewish string in my area.
So Grand Lake Lodge is in Lebanon. And hi, I'm Roz. Hi guys. Hi, Vita. And that's where Grand Lake Lodge was. Colchester, of course, had the big Jewish community also.
Right.
So I'm one of the Lebanon farmers, and my uncle actually was in Danielson. Also later on, Schatzman was the name.
Oh,
so hi Elsie.
First Schatzman, I used to go and visit every time a Jewish family moved anywhere within 15 miles. We would go and bring wine and challah and welcome them. But I was thinking, when we resume our Thanksgiving, our interfaith Thanksgiving service, Judy, when we also have our Seder, which unfortunately because of COVID we haven't had, but in the future, I think the members of Temple Bethel might enjoy the feeling we have, like when we had Passover the first year I went, I was given a number. I said, oh, they're going to have a raffle. Instead, every paragraph was numbered for the Seder, and everybody in the room, they read one paragraph of the Seder. I mean, it's very unique. And we might think about that, Judy, about members of the Temple Bethel coming when we resume our Seder and resume our interfaith Thanksgiving service.
It's a possibility. So I also wanted to share with everyone that our family left Danielson when I was 6 years old, and then we moved to Mansfield, and then later on, of course, I married Kirk, and we moved around. And when we came back in 2001 to Connecticut, I was like meeting all these people at the temple in Danielson, Temple Beth Israel, that knew me, but I was like, how do you know me? How is this? What's our connection? So it was a real treat to meet all these new people that knew my family, but I didn't really know them. I have to say that I had a very similar experience when I came back to our temple at Congregation Bethel, because Kirk and I, of course, met there and got married there, but I wasn't as engaged in the community as I was when we came back and returned with children. So these people either knew of me or they knew my sister Vita, who you can see. She's on my upper right on the screen. I assume it's on your upper right too, but she's zooming from Israel today. So it was a real treat to get reacquainted with all these people that knew my family but that were new to me. So, and
Judy,
now it kind of
Judy?
closes the loop. By having Norm meet my Bethel family, it's great. Yes, Vita?
I want to say what preceded me in New London was Aunt Bessie, who was
Right.
our grandmother's sister. So
Right.
when I came, which was in the late 1970s, people already knew Bessie Solomon.
Right.
And there were many Hadassah ladies who sure knew, Lillian Hendel and all the rest of them knew, Aunt Bessie. And that
Right.
connection just continues. That's all.
Thank you. Yep. Very cool. Do we have other questions for Norm? And I also wanted to mention that, and it's another kind of connection, is you see Paula, she's not visible, her photo is not visible on screen, but her dad and Joel's dad and Warren's father as well was one of the liberators of one of the camps. And so there's that other, connection that I'm sure Norman's parents probably felt to their dad as well. So it's just a lot of connections. My dad spoke Yiddish fluently, but he spoke it so well they thought he was a refugee as well, but he wasn't. He was first generation born here. Nancy, did you have a question?
No.
No. Okay. I thought I saw it must have been like a stretch or something. So thank you so much, Norm. This has been a real treat. And Paula and I will definitely coordinate a date so that we can go take a tour, because it's a really special place.
Well, you're always welcome to come visit us. And, we've done some interesting things with ritual. You want to maybe experience something a little different, we would love to have you join us for one of our events. There's room, and you seem like a friendly group of people, so we would welcome you.
They are. Very good. Michael, you're saying we're not friendly?
Of course, we all are.
Well, thank you so much. Were there any other questions before I log off? No? Mom. That's my mom. Mom is 94 3/4, by the way. And she's Zooming from Amherst to join us today. Go ahead, Mom.
I just want to let everybody know at Bethel that I have been on many, many committees. I've belonged to a lot of organizations, and I have never seen such a wonderful group on the board of directors and the adjunct members and the advisory committee, that everybody works their tail off. I enjoy, writing grant proposals, and I heard the DAR had some money that we could do a documentary, which we could show at Bethel, and everyone, including our own rabbi here, said, Elsie, don't waste your time with the DAR, forget it. We got 2 grants from DAR, but what I want to say is I feel that I am very excited and work very hard, but everybody on that board, they are so committed. Everett Gawendo, he goes down and does that. Richard DeVoren is on today. He goes in and checks on the heat and the hot water. I just want everyone to know that everybody on that board, and nobody gets any money, no money at all. And with so many synagogues closing or losing their building, and churches that we are holding on to the building. Is that because the members of the board, whether they're on the advisory committee, they are so committed and they really work very hard. That's never happened in all the committees I've ever been on. There's always some dead wood that are there. They want it on their resume and they don't do anything. I just want everyone to know it's there because everyone is so committed.
Thanks, Mom. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It is being recorded, so I'll make sure that the link gets posted on Bethel's YouTube channel. It probably won't happen for a week or so. Our office administrator Merrill does that for us. But we'll get it out there as soon as we can, in case you want to hear it again or share it with someone. So thank you so much, Norm, for a great story. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye, New
Bye-bye.
London.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.